Well, good morning. I'm Senator Paul Gazelka. Thank you for all coming. With the snow out there, we had a few people that couldn't make it, but I think this is a really important topic. I have some statements that I want to read. There are many problems confronting Minnesotans, but the state's number one problem is the rise of violence and property crime in the Twin Cities. It is a state problem. Even though most of the current crime wave is in the 7-county metro area, it is a state problem. It's a state problem because the lawlessness which we see growing every day isn't just confined to a few hot spots in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's seeping into the suburbs with greater and greater brazenness every week, and it's influencing all Minnesotans' willingness to come to the Twin Cities. The rampant crime problem today has created a sense of dread among a large number of Minnesotans who previously had thought that their neighborhoods, schools, workplace, local stores, and public spaces were safe. While crime has been on the rise in many large metropolitan areas throughout our country, there are specific things which can be done here to combat this number one problem which plagues our state. I've got a number of proposals that I'm going to talk about today, bills that I'm working on, and there's 3 that I'm going to talk about today. 2 of them are going to be related to minimum sentencing, and that has to do with a reaction to the Minimum Sentencing Guidelines Commission. I wish they would have just voted no yesterday on the things that they're looking at, but instead they just kicked the can down the road. But here are the 3 things that I want to talk to you about today that I'm going to be dropping immediately as we work forward into this next session. The first one is minimum sentencing related to carjacking. If it's a simple robbery which has threatening force, it'll be a minimum sentence of 2 years. First degree with a weapon and bodily harm, second degree activated robbery with a weapon is 4 years, and first degree with a weapon and bodily harm is 6 years minimum sentencing for carjacking. We have record number of carjackings. It's off the charts. I've never seen it the way it is right now. Having to try to keep track of how many things are happening every day in communities throughout Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's out of control. The second one is repeat offenders committing crimes with firearms. Judges and prosecutors can't waive the minimum sentence, which is 5 years. Right now they have been doing that. Representative Brian Johnson had House File 4062 last year. It'll be something like that. And then on a different subject, we have a shortage of police officers. In Minneapolis and St. Paul alone, we know that they should have had at least 1,200 police officers. When they had 800 police officers before the death of George Floyd, they asked for 400 more. And as a result of all of the activities that have been happening and the lack of appreciation from leadership from the governor down to many other Democrat leaders, they're down to 500 police officers. They can barely do 911 calls. And so one of the steps that I'm going to push forward is a signing bonus for recruiting police officers, particularly in high crime areas, but we're still working on the details of that one. But we have to get more people to become police officers throughout the state of Minnesota, throughout the agencies. We are dramatically short, and we don't have enough people getting into the schools. We can see that this is a major problem. Representative Johnson may talk more about that. The final thing that I'm not going to talk a lot about today is the concern I have about the trends on cutting down juvenile incarcerations when they are guilty of serious crimes. It is something I'm exploring, but I'm not yet prepared to talk about today. These ideas would only provide a small part of the much larger solution needed to combat the crime wave which grips the Twin Cities. The legislature can provide certain policies and resources, but the hard work is done by law enforcement officers, prosecutors, the courts, and the corrections system, and of course, the private citizens who increasingly must look out for their own safety and the safety of their families, co-workers, and neighbors. Certainly, there are a number of factors which have led to the murders, carjackings, and violent robberies, which we see almost daily in the news. But talk about tackling the root causes of criminal activity and its increase is only responsible when we've already done everything we can do to protect Minnesotans living their daily lives. It's clear that Governor Walz has been totally deaf to the cries of crime victims. In fact, it's no exaggeration to say that Governor Walz is AWOL on the problem of increased violent crime. Here are some examples. First, during the past 2 years, Governor Walz talked about public safety so-called reforms, but I never heard him say that we need to provide more support for the men and women in blue who safeguard our streets, our homes, and our communities. Second, during the riots and looting in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020, Governor Walz was quick to encourage protesters to exercise their free speech rights, even though that expanded into blocking freeways and impeding firefighters. But he was slow to respond to the rioting of the violence which destroyed the livelihoods of small business owners and disrupted entire neighborhoods. The governor was slow to respond then, and he's slow to the point of doing nothing to respond to the crime surge now. Third, in last year's debate in Minneapolis on defunding the police, Governor Walz publicly stated his opposition not on principle, but because the ballot language was confusing. His opposition to defunding the police was half-hearted and sounded wishy-washy, while other senior office holders in his party were more forthright. Fourth, the governor turned a deaf ear to the request of North Minneapolis residents who asked him last fall to send the National Guard to help the beleaguered Minneapolis Police Department to protect them. Communities of color are the greatest victims of this crime surge. When a black family has bullets flying into their home in North Minneapolis, an elderly Somali woman is assaulted in a store, a Hmong mother is afraid for her kids to play in the streets, a Latino pastor has to gather his community to protect themselves, we have corrosion. It's a corrosive breakdown of our society for the people who need the protection most. The governor talks about achieving greater equity for various communities, but he ignores the most important measurement of equity: equality of feeling safe and secure from violence. Fifth, as Twin Cities violent crime has gone from bad to worse in recent months, I'm hard-pressed to think of any time when the governor has addressed this problem publicly and forthrightly. In recent weeks, we've seen a young store clerk pistol whipped and shot by thieves, an elderly woman sent to the hospital with severe injuries by a purse snatcher, a mother with young children terrorized by carjackers, shoppers held up and assaulted in grocery store parking lots, and on and on and on. The state's capital city achieved an infamous distinction of a record number of homicides. And through all of this, where is Governor Walz? Where is his use of the bully pulpit? He's leaving it to mayors and police chiefs, to everyday citizens to meet about solving the problem while he does nothing. The most disturbing thing about the crime wave, and something I still am exploring, is the number of minors who are perpetuating brutal acts of violence. 13-year-olds committing carjackings, 15-year-old gunmen. They're not just joyriding. They are the leading perpetrators. Instead of learning math and science and social studies, they're learning to become hardened criminals. As a society, we want to redeem them, but letting teenagers suffer less consequences for committing violent felonies may not be the way. We can't turn the other cheek if it means having a knife held against our throat or a gun against our temple. In Tim Walz, Minnesota, there are now too many young, hardened criminals terrorizing and victimizing residents in the core cities and suburbs. Through the inadequate support of law enforcement, the wrong-headed ideas of some in the judicial process, and the indifference of our governor, they are major threats to themselves and the rest of us. These children of Tim Walls must be dealt with, which is why I support 16 and 17-year-old carjackers being prosecuted. The governor's words and his actions and his silence and inactions set the tone in our state on such an existential threat to our society. Notwithstanding Governor Walls' studied nonchalance, I hope we in the legislature will be able to get something done to protect the citizens of Minnesota. And with that, I have a few other folks that I want to have share, and then after that, I'll take questions. Next up will be Jim Mortensen, Law Enforcement Labor Services Executive Director.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jim Mortensen, and I'm the Executive Director for Law Enforcement Labor Services. We are Minnesota's largest public safety labor union, and we represent approximately 6,700 public safety professionals across the state of Minnesota. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Senator Gazelka for the ability to speak with you this morning, and we want to touch on a topic about prosecutor discretion. We are here to discuss how prosecutors are taking it upon themselves to select which laws they will prosecute and which ones they will not. It is not the job of a prosecutor to decide which laws will be enforced and which ones will not. That is the job of the Minnesota legislature. It is the job of the legislature to enact laws. It is the job of a police officer to enforce those laws. It is the job of a prosecutor to prosecute those laws, and it is the job of a judge to uphold those laws. Prosecutors like Ramsey County Attorney John Choi have decided to negate his duties and responsibilities to prosecute what he believes are low-level traffic safety offenses, even if they lead to high-level felony offenses. Today, he believes expired registration and driving after suspension are low-level offenses. My question is, what's next? Will it be speeding? Will it be stop sign? Will it be stoplight violations? Where will this end if we're already heading down the path of selecting which laws we're going to prosecute and which ones we won't? I'm going to give you an example that I'm going to pull from my own 32-year career as a police officer that happened to me several years ago. I assisted a state trooper in stopping a vehicle for what could be potentially a low-level traffic offense, which was a stoplight violation and a speeding violation. When we stopped that vehicle and approached, we went to the passenger side of the vehicle and we found a young black male that had just been shot and killed. So he was deceased in the vehicle when we approached. And he was previous to that traffic stop, he had been in a drive-by shooting. If we had not made that stop or approached that car for what would be deemed a low-level traffic offense, where would that victim be right now, and to make sure that justice was found for that victim, and what would we be doing with the offenders that shot and killed that individual? People in outstate Minnesota, they're scared to come down to the Twin Cities, to Minneapolis and St. Paul, and that's got to change. Certain prosecutors want us to believe that the spike in crime is because of COVID. That's all smoke and mirrors for the media and the general public. Frankly, it's a slap in the face to the victims of these crimes. Prosecutors must be held accountable to do their jobs, because with the lawlessness to us in certain areas of this state, and we must act to reverse those trends so it does not spread to the suburbs or outstate Minnesota. With that being said, we respectfully request the Minnesota legislature and the governors to support legislation that would limit prosecutors' discretion from prosecuting whichever laws they themselves deem important or not important, and leave those decisions up to the Minnesota legislature. Thank you.
Lastly, we'll have Representative Brian Johnson, somebody that has been around public safety for a long time. Brian?
Good morning. The reason I'm here today is because public safety is one of the #1 issues that this state is responsible for, that's listed in our state constitution. Over the last 3 years, there's been serious attacks on our law enforcement and the great law enforcement officers across the state. And we're now, unfortunately, seeing what's happened because of it. Crime in Minneapolis and St. Paul has skyrocketed. It's now moving into the suburbs. And what was interesting, you didn't hear a lot about it or a lot of outcry until they were starting to have carjackings, or as they should properly call them, armed robberies in the city of Edina. Then all of a sudden it came to the forefront. It should have been dealt with a long time ago. City of Minneapolis, their charter requires them to have 888 officers. At that time, the chief, Arredondo, requested 400 more, just to answer the calls, because not all the 911 emergency calls can be answered by the Minneapolis Police Department at that time. Then we had the unfortunate incident with George Floyd. At that time, it really went after law enforcement officers because of one poor decision by an officer that maybe not should have been hired in the first place. Since that time, Minneapolis is down to 500 or less officers. When the Department of Justice came in to take a look at what's going on in that department, they were shocked at the number, because the city of Minneapolis, for its population, should have between 1,800 and 2,400 officers. When an officer cannot spend time doing the community service stuff, stopping and talking to people on the street, talking to store owners, talking to the public, they cannot build community relations. And to build those relations, they have to have time to communicate and talk with the people that they are trying to protect, to learn what's going on, learn who's doing things. Instead, they're doing reactive police work, just reacting to call after call after call, and it's gotten worse. This past year, over 60 children have been shot, including one that lived less than a mile from me in Minneapolis, was shot in the city of Minneapolis. But their department is so short-handed, they'd take investigators and detectives off the homicide cases to have them work the street and go out on patrol. And that's now a still unsolved homicide of Nick Inger, 17-year-old who went down to watch the cars doing donuts in the intersection. Unfortunately, it was a poor decision by him to go down there, but he should not have been killed. Now, with the attacks on law enforcement, it's unfortunate because law enforcement and the great professionals that they are across this state, and I'm proud to stand with them, are just the tip of the spear in public safety. They're the ones on the street dealing with it, enforcing the laws that the legislature enacts and the governor signs into law. But behind them are the prosecutors and the judges. Yes, there is prosecutor has some discretion, but it's not blanket discretion. It's on an individual case-by-case discretion. County Attorney Freeman and County Attorney Troy are now doing blanket discretion. And just like the story you heard from the speaker in front of us, I have stories like that as well. I stopped a car for a minor offense, expired tabs. I use them for positive interactions with the public. But when I stopped this car, ran the license plate, I recognized the owner. They were down in Florida. And this 19-year-old from Minneapolis at that time was driving their car with expired tabs. I contacted another deputy, went out there. The burglary had just occurred. These minor offenses can be used for positive reinforcement, positive contact with the public, but they do solve a lot of crime. But now we have prosecutors refusing to even look into the felony because of the low-level traffic stop, which could be a positive interaction with law enforcement, and demonizing law enforcement instead. Then we have the judges that do not do the minimum mandatory sentences, especially in crimes involving firearms. We had a judge release a individual who had a lengthy criminal history the other day to go to a funeral. Yes, it was nice he could go to the funeral. But he had a lengthy history of not showing up, doing violent crimes, and lo and behold, he did not report back to jail. He's now, Hennepin County is now trying to find him. And that same judge refused to allow a person that was convicted to spend the last Christmas with their family and had 0 criminal history points before that unfortunate incident, which was an accident dealing with Kim Potter. We need to somehow look at keep putting judges and letting people know what judges are doing, what prosecutors are doing. It's one thing we're going to look into this year. Get some sunlight so when people are voting for these individuals, they have an understanding of what they are doing. I'm going to look more into these bills that Senator Gazelka has, because I think there's some good ideas in them. And I'm hoping that the House DFL will look at things in a way to honor and stand behind our law enforcement community, because the things they've been pushing for the last 3 years have caused, I believe, have caused these circumstances down here in Minneapolis and St. Paul with the high crime and the high violent crime that's going on. And unfortunately, it's now spreading into the rest of the surrounding area of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and also up into the greatest part of Minnesota, greater Minnesota. And we need to end this before we turn into places like in the movie Mad Max or RoboCop, where it's not safe for the public to do anything. We need to crack down on violent crime and get it safe for the citizens of not only of greater Minnesota, but the citizens of Minneapolis and St. Paul, so the kids can actually not just go out to their backyard, but it can go out in their front yard and play instead of hiding in the basement trying to avoid bullets being shot all over this parts of this city. Thank you.
I'll wrap up with just a quick comment. The last couple of years in the legislature, I personally had to stop a lot of anti-police measures. Just a few as an example. The other side wanted to change qualified immunity and make the individual police officer buy their own insurance, which would have been extremely expensive and would have driven police officers out of the profession. They wanted to force police officers to live within the city they work. We wanted to make that more of an incentive rather than a penalty. They wanted to put citizens over the police board rather than what we did, and added more citizens to the police board as an advisory council rather than telling them what to do. They wanted to release early body camera footage, which before necessary, when you're actually gathering facts, they didn't want to get that out too early. And they statewide wanted to prohibit the traffic stops and being able to find other things like Representative Johnson talked about. So this year, it is my hope that myself and the rest of the Republicans move forward a pro-police agenda. Instead of trying to defund the police, we need to refund the police. And with that, I'll take questions either to me or Representative Johnson or anybody else here.
Senator, can you more specifically lay out each of these bills that you're bringing forward? We got some idea, but wondering if you could be a little more specific about what they would do.
Sure. I mean, the first one is, hang on, I'll put it here. The first one related to carjacking, right now they don't have to have a 2-year minimum sentence. And what's typically happening is they're not getting any sentence. If it's simple robbery, the second degree, where I said it's 4 years, or the simple robbery, it's 2 years. You don't get a choice. They can no longer we wanted to give them discretion, but as mentioned before, it's just been blanket discretion where nobody seems to be held accountable, and that's why we're putting the minimum in. At the second degree, I mentioned second degree activated or aggravated robbery with a weapon, 4 years is the minimum, and first degree weapon and bodily harm is 6 years. So right now, none of that is in place, and that's the only tweak we're making to that. But we're just saying you can't just keep letting people go. It's not just catch and release. There has to be consequences, and very much similar on the same thing. If you've been convicted with a firearm and now you are arrested again with a firearm, you don't get to be released. That there's a minimum sentence. That minimum sentence is 5 years, and so and it is in response to the fact that the governor and his administration is not tough on crime, and those are two of the areas that we see some of the most major rise that we want to address.
Senator, you focused a little bit on youth who are committing carjackings. Is it your position that 16 and 17-year-olds should be tried as adults?
Not necessarily, but they can be tried as an adult is the point. And so I want to make sure that not every 16 and 17-year-old is just let go because they're a juvenile. We have the ability to do that, and it is my hope that the prosecutors and judges will think about why we have such a rise in crime. The other part I'm exploring is we know that some of the juvenile detention centers were closed as a result of abuse, but what are we doing with all of these kids that are in this situation doing heinous crimes? And many more of them, we need to be considered putting them in different facilities. Not every time, every situation, but there is a huge rise, and if we allow them just to be out on the streets over and over doing these things with no consequence, we're going to harden them as criminals just being out on the streets.
Do you think there were any lessons learned from the 80s and 90s tough on crime sort of sentencing that led to an era of increased mass incarceration that disproportionately affected black people?
The lessons is we don't want to lock everyone up if they have an opportunity to reform. But we can see that pendulum has swung too far right now. The other reason they were shut down is because of COVID. Well, younger people are not highly at risk of COVID. I think they still need to, if deemed appropriate, they need to be put into some facilities. And so we can learn from the 80s, but we have to look right now at what the problems are. With carjacking so far off the charts, we have to do something. With murder rates at all-time highs, we have to do something. And so that's why I said I'm still exploring that. That one is a little bit more complicated, but we got to be willing to look at what's happening and take some action.
Senator, as Majority Leader, you did agree to a lot of policy that was aimed at police reform. There was like limiting no-knock warrants, for example, or warrior training, just naming a few. There was the sign and release measure. Is there any of that you think went too far, that you regret at this point, or that you think should be revisited? I mean, especially some of it in light of what you're saying today?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, we tried to work with all interested parties. That meant the police, the minority communities, the governor, the House, and in the end, people were demanding action. I felt like in some ways we were going too fast, which is what I said at the time. The biggest one that I think needed to be revisited and the other side would not was the use of deadly force. It was pressure to get it done. The police groups all signed off on it, but when we realized what it was, the consequences of it, last year we tried to change it and the other side would not change it. And as a result of that, there's a lawsuit. I believe that the courts will call it unconstitutional. I believe they will correct it. But there were a number of things that we did that I thought were good. I think adding citizens to the post board as an advisory council, I think that was good, just not over the post board. The expansion of body cameras, I think everybody thought that was a good idea, as long as you didn't release the information too quickly, hindering the fact-finding part of it. Matson Strong was something I really pushed hard for. Eric Matson, the police officer that was shot in the head, and there was not enough time for the crime, and so we made it more the penalty higher if you're trying to shoot a police officer, hurting them or injuring them, that it became much more consequences are higher. We gave pay raises to the police in that, which I think was really important. I think that's going to be in the future, the fact that they're going to have to get paid more to get more good police officers in the profession. And I think about the last one is Hometown Heroes, where we created more resources for mental health for firefighters. So there was a lot of things we did that were good. I talked earlier about the things that I stopped, not defunding the police, not dismantling them, not taking away their tools, and not discouraging them from being in the profession. Those were things that I stood against.
You've said now too, you mentioned incentives for police recruits, and then you just said higher pay for police. Do you think that's enough to get more people interested in the profession?
I'm just saying we have to move quickly, and typically if a profession is maligned, you're going to have to pay more to get good people in there. I think we should consider giving them education that we help pay for, a 2-year degree. I mean, we've got to get more police in there quickly, and I think signing bonuses are appropriate. Other states have offered that, and we're going to be competing against other states too. But for Minneapolis and St. Paul and the Twin Cities in particular, we are way, way behind. St. Paul as well. We haven't talked much about St. Paul, but they have at least 100 police officers short. And so this is something we have to take action on now. We should all be looking for people to become police officers and encourage them that this is the most noble profession they can think of, and we need them.
Budget surplus that everybody wants to spend, is that a good use for some of these additional dollars the state currently has?
If our number one problem right now is public safety, that the streets aren't safe, and that we recognize that it's police officers that help us keep our community safe, then that is where we should put our resources. And I absolutely fully support that.
I'm reading from the legislative agenda of the Minnesota Police Chiefs, and I just wanted to run a couple things by you on guns in particular. And I was just curious, they've got a couple things in here: criminal background checks, extreme risk protection orders. Are either of those things that you're interested, even though police chiefs say that they think it would be good for gun violence?
No, I'm not. I've never been supportive of those, and I'm still not. I think more and more people, frankly, are buying guns as protection because there's not enough police out there right now. One of the carjackings, I believe it was Edina, it was a Good Samaritan that had his permit to carry that took out his firearm and pointed it at the people that had abused that woman and were trying to take her car, and that was part of the reason why they fled. And so I think we're going the opposite of that, but I do not support those.
Even though they're police chiefs on their agenda?
I don't support those.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you would like to see in terms of transparency for charging decisions? We've heard both of you talk about that. What does that look like? Is that a campaigning issue? Is that a policy issue?
Charging who?
Charging decisions coming from prosecutors or?
Yeah. I think more than anything, we're frustrated that it seems like it's a revolving door for the criminal, that none of them are being incarcerated. And so we are pushing hard on that. The Sentencing Guideline Commission, they had over 3,000 people tell them not to move forward, and just a few hundred encouraged them in the direction they were going. And so it's like they're tone deaf to what the public is saying. I get contacted all the time from people everywhere, but particularly Minneapolis and St. Paul, saying we do not feel safe. And so if we don't take some bold action, we've got problems. And this cannot just be a Republican issue. In the end, I spoke at a police event within the last few weeks, and I told the police officers there, get involved in politics, both Republican and Democrat, because we have to change the narrative and that we need more police if we're going to keep our communities safe.
Maybe I can ask it a different way. We hear a lot of concern from you about prosecutors and about judges. Are there concrete steps that you can take in the legislature to change that? Well,
I'll tell you what, if we ask any political question, well, I'll tell you what, if a governor has the authority, is responsible to appoint judges, and appoint judges that follow the Constitution and follow the law. And so when a judge decides they're not going to follow what the legislators intended, I feel like they're going outside the scope of what they're supposed to do. So that's one thing that can happen right now. And prosecutors, if they're not going to do the minimum sentencing, then the legislative bodies can act. And so we're frustrated that they are not prosecuting, and we have one of the lowest incarceration rates in the country. I think we're 49th or 48th, and that's fine as long as crime is not sky high. But crime is sky high in Minnesota, and so I think we need to do a little bit more of the incarceration.
I had a follow-up question, either for you or for Representative Johnson, but is the Minneapolis Police Department a good example of an agency that, to highlight, given their record in the number of payouts that the city of Minneapolis has had to pay out of its own pocket? The Jaleel Stalling case is another one in which they had ridden around during the riots and fired on people without warning, and Jaleel Stalling was acquitted by a jury after that went to trial. They're also under a federal investigation by the Justice Department and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. I mean, is there any reason to not mention those records without the attacks on law enforcement?
Well, you have to remember, the mayor isn't, and the city council are in charge of the police department. Hiring, policy, including their personnel policy manual and the policies that they have. If the city council did not, and the mayor did not do their duties, making sure policies are up to date, that's on the city council. The officers are following their policy.
Was it policy in the Jaleel Stallings case?
With your mask on, I can't understand
the Jaleel Stallings case, in which they accused him of attempted murder, but he was acquitted on all the charges.
Well, that was up to the jury to acquit. They did the investigation, and apparently, County Attorney Freeman thought there was enough there to charge. He charged it out, but unfortunately, the jury decided to acquit. That's doing the duties of the prosecution, how it works. Sometimes you get acquitted, sometimes you're found guilty. That's up to the jury to decide. The police department believed that there was enough to arrest. The prosecutor believed there was enough to charge. If the city council of Minneapolis decides to pay out on that, that's their choice. Unfortunately, the officers don't have a say in that. The officers could have done nothing wrong. But when the city actually pays out without taking it to court, they're going to have a lot more lawsuits filed against them, thinking that it's easy money. Unfortunately, the city council decided to do that.
I want to add just a general comment about that, because 85% of our public trusts the police, and so that doesn't mean every police officer is perfect. Every good cop that I know hates if there's a bad cop, and they want them weeded out too. It destroys the profession of the many great police officers, their reputation. So as I look at the police force, the vast majority are doing an amazing job, and they don't want to defend a bad cop either. When we talk about being tougher on crime and more resources for the police, we're not saying that police officers or frankly politicians are above the law. None of us are above the law. We're all accountable to it. But I just want to remind people that most people believe and trust the police in Minnesota.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.